Hi guys, I hope you're doing well. This part is going to be really quick because I want to get to the content. But this week, what you'll have to do is watch this video, answer the attendance question, and then everything else is optional. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a rest. We've also covered most of, well, the important content for the year. Now we're just having fun. So this is one of my favorite lessons. You know my passion for Ireland. If you take away anything from this class, you should know something about Ireland and Northern Ireland. So yeah, let's jump to it. We're talking about satire today.
Hi guys, it's me again. So before we actually talk about satire, I just want to refresh your memory on the situation in Ireland, which we've talked about briefly, but I have two quotes from English people during this time, so not Irish people. And the first one is from this historian, Charles Kingsley, who he's a Victorian historian, and this is his reflection on Ireland. So he says, "Daunted by the human chimpanzees I saw along that 100 miles of horrible country, I don't believe they are our fault. I believe there are not only many more of them than of old, but they are happier, better, and more comfortably fed and lodged under our rule than they ever were." Our rule here refers to the British, and during this time there was horrible famine in the country, so they were not happier, better, or more comfortably fed and lodged. This is where it gets a little bit brutal. But to see white chimpanzees is dreadful. If they were black, one would not feel it so much. But their skins, except where tanned by exposure, were as white as ours. So this kind of illustrates to you some of the racism that was going on in Britain at this time. So the Irish were not people, they were dehumanized. The second quote is from a guy that was prime minister in 1874 to 1880. So he's talking about the Irish. He says, "The Irish hate our order, our civilization, our enterprising industry, our pure religion." He was from the Church of England. "This wild, reckless, indolent, uncertain, superstitious race have no sympathy with the English character." If that sounds familiar to you, maybe you are reflecting on William Golding and how there are some characters that really are keen about the epicness of the British, well specifically the English. In fact, Jack at one point says, "The English are best at everything." This was a very common belief between the English and all the people that they conquered during this time. I have a political cartoon. So like I mentioned, there was loads of Irish famines during these times. So one side you have England, and what's happening is they're politically sowing a lot of seeds. And then in Ireland, there's horrible starvation and destitution. So you can understand probably why there was some bitterness in between these two countries. The Irish just were tortured, truly tortured. And in fact, during a lot of these horrible famines, the British actually suppressed support. In this picture, this would actually be a piece of, or a political cartoon that would have actually come out of England. So you can see the English woman on the side. Oh, she's very dainty and beautiful, and she's just cooking. And if you look on the ground, there's a shattered plate. Her hands are folded. She's in a very submissive position, please don't hurt me. And then there's Ireland on the side, who's big and tough and scary, and she's not very beautiful. She's almost ape-like in her face. So this is the racism that you can see even on the art. Again, that's a political cartoon, so that it will be politicized. Okay, let's talk about Jonathan Swift. That's why we're all here. So Jonathan Swift, he was a guy, he's actually half English, but he grew up in Dublin. He was furious. That's why I'm drawing that angry face on him. He was furious about the English arrogance and greed, the useless politics, and the religious extremes and fanaticism that was going on during this time. And rightly so. He was frustrated for his country. He was angry because people were starving so much. And so he writes this book it's more or less an article that he got published. It's called A Modest Proposal. And modest here means small or not that big of a deal. Just a suggestion. It's not anything flashy. And this is his way of kind of discussing and showing off his anger towards the situation in Ireland. So he's going to write about the people and the starvation. And he actually will give us a nice picture of what is going on in Ireland. He's very descriptive. And his whole point is he's trying to make this situation better. How do we, for the greater good of the public, how do we fix this situation of extreme poverty and starvation in Ireland? Well, I'll start off by saying this was not very well received by the public. In fact, after this was published in the paper, they were calling for his death. So we'll get to that juicy bit in a second. But what is the problem? So the way he starts off, he's describing what's happening. He says, it's a melancholy object to those who walk through the great town, Dublin, or travel in the country when they see the streets and roads and cabin doors crowded with beggars of the female sex, followed by 3, 4, or 6 children, all in rags, importuning every passenger for alms. So here he's giving us a picture. There's all these women wandering around with tons of kids, and they're all hungry. And now he's saying, but my intention is very far from being confined to provide only for the children of professed beggars. It's one of a much greater extent, and shall take the whole number of infants of a certain age who are born of parents, in effect, as little able to support them as to those who demand our charity on the street. So he's saying, in fact, my solution is going to be so great, it's going to impact this entire generation. I'm going to skip over a lot of this meat, no pun intended. But what you will find, if you want to read through the whole article, I've uploaded it to the drive. He is incredibly logical. So he talks in money values and weight values and pound values. So he gives you this situation. There's this many people in Ireland. There's this many children. They cost this much to feed. And this is our problem. So he gives us the problem, and then he says, here's the solution. I shall now, therefore, humbly propose my own thoughts, which I hope will not be liable to the least objection. He says, okay, so I have this American friend, and he says that a young, healthy child, well nursed, is, at a year old, the most delicious and nourishing, wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled. I will make no doubt that it will equally serve in a, this French word, fraisiers, or ragout. I don't know. Pardon my French, literally. So he has some ethos in there with his American friend. You'll notice, if you're familiar with rhetoric at all, he uses tons of rhetoric in this piece. So this is where the drama happens, as you can see. So Swift's whole point is basically saying, you know what, if we have this many kids and this much starvation, well, how can we solve this problem? You know what? We can start eating the babies. It's a gruesome thought, isn't it? But on paper, it makes sense to some extent. He goes on to show you, one, why they're a delicacy, why they would be good, why they would actually make money for Ireland, why this would help with population control, why it would actually mean that a child would have an excellent first couple of years because the mother would have a huge incentive to basically feed the baby as much as possible because it would get fat, and that you could sell the baby for a little bit more. So he goes through this list and basically argues all these reasons that logically make sense as to why they should do this. And he does get gruesome. Like I mentioned, this is not for the faint of heart. And that's part of the reason this scandalized people so much. I mentioned before, they were calling for his head, basically. There was tons of people who just did not understand, one, that this was satire, but two, they were just shocked, scandalized, offended. And that is one of the powers of satire. So we get to the end of this, and here we are. Basically, he wraps it up by saying, this is what's actually happening in Ireland. Right now, there is true tragedy. So unlike the guy that we were reading earlier, the historian, Charles Kingsley, he's saying, in Ireland, there is a perpetual scene of misfortunes. There's oppression of landlords. They just don't have money to pay their rent or to trade. There's no food. There's no houses. There's no clothes to cover. There's tough weather. People are starving. It's horrible. So he's saying this is actually reality. And then he says, from the sincerity of my heart, I am trying to do this for the public good. So he's making you question, and he's making his readers question, what actually is the best option for the public? Because what we're doing right now is despicable. There are people being tortured. And so he's saying, maybe in some way, this suggestion or this recommendation actually protects in some way the well-being of the children of Ireland. Or maybe he's more pondering that. He's saying, this is my best. This is the best I can give you. With what we have so far. And what this is supposed to make the reader feel is like, what? So the choices are either leave it as it is or eat the babies? Impossible. Both of those are impossible. It's logically effective, but morally it is despicable. And so that's the power of satire. So here are just a couple of things. I'll wrap this up really quick. But satire is super common these days. There are loads of it. Think Saturday Night Live. A lot of our political discussion is actually satire. When you're writing satire, you don't actually say it's satire. That's why people get tricked by The Onion sometimes, or any of these websites that produce satirical news, because you don't say. And that's part of the thing. It's supposed to make you have some outrage, and then because of your outrage, you're supposed to reflect a little bit. And that is also why you get into trouble sometimes. And then last but not least, I'm just going to give you an overview of Swift's thing. He first introduces the problem. Second, he gives you his radical and unfortunately logical solution. And then at the very last thing, he essentially says, this is still the problem. Quite frankly, if anyone else has a better idea, I'm willing to listen to it. So satire, good satire, is supposed to provoke some sort of reaction from the audience. So that is a brief discussion and introduction to Modest Proposal by Swift. Have a great week, guys. I'm just letting you know that all you have to do is you're going to brainstorm some problem, some social problem that frustrates you, and you're going to come up with some radical solution to kind of fix it. So, for example, I one time had a student who wrote a piece of satire on the coldness of the school. And what was his solution for fixing that? Well, he suggested that we create tule bag bonfires. He went through and explained the benefits and maybe some of the challenges of losing all the tule bags, but in the end he came to the conclusion that, in fact, yes, the tule bags burning would be the most effective way, if they're his best solution that he could come up with to fix the cold school problem. So remember, satire provokes people to act. So see if you can come up with something genius. You don't have to write any long paper, but you're just coming up with an idea. See if anything interesting pops into your head. Have a great week, and yeah, see you next week.